This is HB 2238 or 2238, which is eliminating the dollar limitation for acceptance of gifts by donors to school districts or cities or both for library purposes. Again, in the spirit of saving some time, if it's okay with the committee, we won't have the reviser come in unless you want to. Everybody still had their head around it pretty well? All right, what's your pleasure with 2238? Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the committee pass out House Bill 2238 favorable for passage.
We have a motion. Representative Sanders, seconds.
Second. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. All right, committee, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. It passes. Favorable. Out of committee, Gary. Okay, committee, the next item of business on our agenda is hearing HB 2233, which is enacting the Municipal Historic Building Act. And I would like to call on Revisor Heim if he's available for an explanation on this bill.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Members
Welcome
of the committee. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This bill, as you pointed out, is cited as the Municipal Historic Building Act. And basically, it requires cities to have an election if they decide to sell, destroy, demolish, or dispose of, otherwise change, I guess, any public building that is more than 80,000 square feet in size and has been placed on the National Register of Historic Places. And it's got the ballot format in the bill. And the city shall pay all costs related to the placement of this question on the ballot at the next scheduled general election. This section shall be an enactment of the legislature applicable uniformly to all cities. I'm not sure that means anything. I don't think it is a uniform act, but anyway, I think that sentence doesn't really add anything to the bill.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Committee, any questions of the reviser? Okay, if not, we will go ahead and get started. We'll start out this morning with proponent testimony, and how it is listed is a little bit out of order, at least on my agenda. Just want to warn you of that. The first proponent testimony we will have is from Celeste Racette, Save Century 2 in Wichita. Celeste, welcome to the Local Government Committee.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right, I'm still going to kind of, if you don't mind, this is not a time slideshow. Anyway, deep breath. Good morning, Chairman Thompson, members of the Local Government Committee. Thank you for letting me speak. It's a privilege. I'm a native Wichitan, born and raised in Wichita. I earned my BS in accounting from the University of Kansas, my MBA from Wichita State University. My background, professional background, is in banking. I've been accounting officer, chief internal auditor, bank examiner, and fraud investigator with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So I know a lot about finances and numbers. They don't scare me. I'm hoping to give you a slideshow on Century 2. There's 29 slides, and you should have the first and last slide in your packet. Let me begin with an excerpt from a poem from late Wichita State University English professor Bruce Cutler entitled Century 2. A dome where the little bends into the big Arkansas, caresses the curve of the sky with its own, expanding into O, and rounder than any sweep of sky. This is Century 2. I'm going to move this with me so you can hear me talk. Century 2 was created in honor of Wichita's 100-year centennial celebration. I don't know if all of you know that or not, but it was named by the citizens. They picked the name Century 2, and there it is right there in downtown Wichita on the east side of the Big Arkansas River. In Wichita's early days, this spot was pretty important to Wichita. The Native American Indians used to camp on the site of the Arkansas River here. This is Indians crossing the river right there. And their wigwams, which were rounded buildings, is mimicked in the design of Century 2. I'm not sure how many of you know about the design elements, but that rounded curve of the wigwam is mimicked in the dome of Century 2. In 1961, Wichita citizens voted on the passage of the bonds to pay for the building. So this is a city-driven building and project. This is a picture of architect Roy Varenhorst, one of 2 architects on the plan, and my father, Mayor Vince Bogart, who was mayor back at the time when Century 2 was created, back when mayors only served 1-year term to prevent a concentration of power. I don't know where this 3D model is to Century 2, but it's quite interesting and shows the circular design. The total cost to build Century 2 was $12,600,000. Voted for by Wichita citizens, paid for by city bonds, bid on by architects and contractors, and it is a municipal building owned by us, Wichita citizens and taxpayers. The circular design is rather unique in that this was before computer-generated design. I want you to think about that a minute. This is a hand-drawn overhead section of Century 2 marked by 10 degrees where each of the 36 columns resides along the outside edge of the building and 4 balconies prominent on the 2nd level. This is a cross-section of the theater, and you can see the sloping architecture of the roof and the cutout section of the upward sloping of the continental seating in the theater. This is an actual picture of construction which began in 1966 after the demise of architect John Hickman, who was the first architect on this project. And as you can see, the cement pillars have been sunk deep into the ground and they're starting to take structure. This is the concrete core. It is a solid concrete core and it supports 15-ton trusses, 217 feet long. This is an example of that ribbing. There's over 600 miles of steel structures throughout the building and over 6 million pounds of steel footage in this building. It is a solid built building. There were 25 rail cars of plaster shipped from Sun City, Kansas, where John, help me, I'm forgetting the phrase, but it's the special type of gypsum that was done and built into the plastering of this building. 25 railroad cars, hand mixed by plasterers, and built into the inside of the building itself. You can't do that anymore. When the building opened in January 1969, Roy Varenhorst, who was the 2nd architect to take on the project, I'm just going to read the beginning of this. The notion that culture is a luxury persists in the minds of those that do not realize that culture is the best of what we are and what we hope to become. Design elements for Century 2, the blue roof represents the Kansas sky. The rounded dome represents the Native American Indians that camped on the Big Arkansas. The sand-colored columns are hand-mixed to represent the buff color for wheat, 36 around the building. It stands next to the Brutalist-style library. Brutalist is a French word, which means that concrete is brutal, and it has won a national architectural design, one of the only few buildings in Kansas that has that designation. That's the library on the left. And then Century 2 in the skyline, lit up at night by the concentric circles around the edge, is on the right. What's unique about the placement of this building is Century 2 and the library are mid-century modern buildings. The Broadview Hotel, which you see in the brown building, is from 1920. There's a Carnegie Library across the street, Beaux Arts, 1920. And the Sedgwick County Historic Museum is 1890, Proudfoot and Bird. So in a 1-block area, we have unique buildings that are all on the National Register of Historic Places. We should be proud of these buildings. Century 2 is worth preserving. Whoops, sorry about that. Let's see if I can get that back real quick. Let's see, it's not letting me page through. Let me catch up. Is it over there? Can you bring it up over there? I don't know what happened. Dealing with volunteers. So our salary is zero. Everybody here has labored hours. Our volunteers, we've had 17,000 people sign our petition. You're looking at grassroots campaign right here. We're not paid by the chamber. We're not paid by lobbyists. We're not paid by special interest groups. We represent so much. So forgive our immature presentation. Okay, this is what Mary Jane Till Theater looks like. It's a beautiful, intimate little theater, still in great shape for small music theater productions for youth, for children. Hope you can hear me. This is Concert Hall. Vernon Knudsen from UCLA drafted the scope and the curve, and this is all hand plastered, so that you get supreme acoustics in Concert Hall. I've been going to concerts there. I'm a concert violinist. I had a music scholarship to KU. The best acoustics, he was with UCLA, has a theater named after him, and also did MGM Studios. This is what it looks like from the stage out into Concert Hall in the balcony. It's called Continental Seating, 6,2500. Here's Convention Hall, terrazzo, flooring, exhibition hall. We have a website. We do fundraising. Here's one of our little fans. He's got a Say Century 2 button. We have a lot of fans. We held public meetings with guest panels, including Bill Warren and Ann Garvey and other distinguished architects. We have volunteers that have come to our public meetings and that have gone out to get signatures. We've had public voter rallies and held interviews. We've done a municipal petition drive to get signatures to create a vote to save Century 2. This is what the petition looks like. 17,265 signatures were signed during COVID. That's pretty amazing. You may not know this, but Francis Black Bear Boson met John Hickman and Roy Varenhorst when they were designers in Beechcraft, and they became fast friends. This is called Wichita, My Son, and if you look closely, you see Century 2 in the library in the background. He was actually going to paint murals inside Century 2, and his Keeper of the Plains signifies the unity between these two sites, the consecular circle, the round circular, which is sacred to the Native Americans. So I didn't know if you knew that, but they were friends. And then we delivered our petitions. You can see the stack. They're in a little cart there in the lower right-hand corner. 17,000 signatures were delivered to the mayor from our municipal petition drive. And now I'm going to let Carl Peterjohn speak to you about that petition drive. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And committee, we do have next Carl Peterjohn. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, Vice Chair Blex, Ranking Minority Curtis, committee members. My name is Carl Peterjohn, and I'm up here primarily because I know how to petition. I used to be a county commissioner, was a county commissioner for 8 years in Sedgwick County from 2009 to 2017, and all 3 elections that I ran in for county commission, one didn't work out too well, as you can tell, I petitioned to get on the ballot. My most successful petition drive, we collected about 1,500 signatures to meet a signature requirement of almost 1,000 to qualify my candidacy to get on the ballot. I mention this because to qualify for a statewide race, you need 5,000 signatures, valid signatures, to do so. The petition drive that approximately 400 volunteer petitioners, and we had a lot of other folks who put up yard signs, who wore buttons, who went to meetings, wrote letters. But we had about over 400 people who circulated our petition to generate those 17,000 signatures. That dwarfs my petition drive when I was a candidate. But I knew a little bit more about it. Of course, these folks now know quite a bit about petitioning. But to get a municipal initiative petition going, we needed over 12,000 valid signatures. And we had no idea we were going to do it in the midst of a pandemic that made this the most extraordinary petition drive in some ways, I think, that has occurred in Kansas. Because when you're talking about losing, we had 180 days to collect over 12,000 valid signatures. At Celeste said, we collected 17,265 signatures, presented them to the city clerk and Mayor Whipple on July 10th this year. And in doing so, this milestone petition drive was the equivalent of, qualify for a statewide candidacy. You need 5,000 valid signatures. We turned in over 17,000 total. It was equivalent of, I'd say in some ways, depending on, and we checked a lot of these signatures, we knew they were good. But we lost almost 50 days between the end of March and May, and had to restart the petition drive from square zero. I mean, everything had been shut down. You all know what it was like. Believe me, a petition drive, and we lost all the good weather between the end of March and early May. We started out when it was very cold, and we ended it when it was very warm. This was a remarkable achievement by all volunteers. Now, some petition drives, they get paid circulators. This petition drive, zero. It was all citizens who love their heritage, they love the iconic structure, they love the landmark. Now, you've heard from Celeste, you've heard from me talking about the petition drive. John Todd is going to be kind of our cleanup hitter to finish off our presentation in support of this vitally important legislation. And at this point, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, but I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Todd at this point. I very much appreciate the committee's time and attention.
Thank you, and we will hold questions till the end of proponent testimony. So committee, the next presenter will be John Todd.
Good morning. Dear Representative Thompson and members of the House Local Government Committee, my name is John Todd. I live at 1559 Payne in Wichita, Kansas. I moved to Wichita in 1965 as a sales representative for the National Gypsum Company. And you've heard Celeste mention the gypsum. It was mined at Sun City, Kansas, and made into plaster at the Medicine Lodge, Kansas. And I had the good fortune of supplying the 25 carloads of plaster that went into this historic Century II project. On behalf of over 17,000 Wichita petition signers, I want to thank Chairman Thompson and members of this committee for holding a hearing today, allowing the voices of proponents to speak in support of House Bill 2233, an act known as the Municipal Historic Buildings Act. And the act deals with allowing the voters to vote. It's a voting decision. On July 10th, 2020, the Save Century II Citizens Group presented the Wichita Mayor and the City Clerk with petitions signed over 17,000 Wichita voters. That represented a little over 1/3 of the voters who voted in the last Wichita municipal election. So it was a large block of people. They were seeking the adoption of an ordinance which would require a binding, the word binding is important, vote, prior to Century II and the former Wichita Public Library, both of architectural and historic significance, being demolished, leased, or sold in any manner that would adversely impact the buildings. Unfortunately, the city set this aside in court. However, at about the same time, in response to the Save Century II petitions, on August 20th, in August of 2020, the Wichita City Council adopted City Council Policy Number 38. A copy of this policy is in your packet for your review. In the City Council policy, it was adopted by all of the City Council. They mentioned the petition. They mentioned the 17,000. They mentioned that the petition would require a binding vote. They mentioned the historical importance of the buildings. They mentioned that in 1961, Wichita voters approved a $12.6 million on bonds for a civic center, later to be named Century II. So the citizens, for a long time, initially had skin in the game. This was their building, they built it, and they had a say on it when it was built. Now, this is interesting because if you look at the city council policy, essentially it says, subject to future acts of the legislature, and that's why we're here today, municipal governments may not call a binding election unless such election is authorized by state statute. That's what we're asking for here today. Based on the above consideration, the council went on, this is in their written policy. It is the council's intent to enact a policy consistent with the spirit and intent of the ordinance requested by the Save Century 2 petitions, while remaining in compliance with provision and dictates of state law. At that time, they adopted what they called an advisory non-binding election. And one of the representatives that happens to be my representative, John Carmichael from Wichita, I was visiting with him on the phone the other night. He said he wasn't sure they had the statutory authority to even hold a non-binding vote. So it's really in the interest of the city of Wichita as well as their people that you pass this bill and it becomes part of statutes, so we can have a binding vote on those two buildings. So as reiterating, as you can see, the Wichita City Council and the Century 2 petitioners on the part of this that relates to voting, we're on the same page. The need for the creation of a state statute that authorizes the city of Wichita to hold a binding election for its citizens. We need the Kansas legislature, we need your help in passing this win-win bill for the people of Wichita and Kansas. House Bill number 2233 is a bill initiated by the Wichita Save Century 2 group. We had an attorney assist us in writing this, and is written to uniformly require a binding and mandatory vote of the affiliated voters. It says municipally owned buildings exceeding 80,000 square feet that are on the National Register of Historic Places before they can be demolished or destroyed. We believe there are only two buildings in the state of Kansas that meet these definitions, Century 2 and the former Wichita Public Library. Passage of House Bill 2233 would ensure a vote of the people of Wichita to decide the fate of these two iconic historic buildings, and not just through the City Council, through a non-binding advisory vote. The passage of House Bill 2233 also supports the intent and language enumerated in the Bill of Rights of the Kansas Constitution, and I quote, "All power is inherent in the people. The people have the right to petition the government for the redress of grievances," end quote. The right to vote is also an important part of the fabric of our system of government. Please let the voters decide the fate of two iconic municipally owned building landmarks in Wichita by passing House Bill 2233. I pray you will pass this bill out of committee and that you will support its passage in both houses of the legislature. I stand for questions. I think we have our two other conferees. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Todd. The next proponent is Walt Chappelle, and I think he's going to appear via WebEx. Are you with us, is it Chappelle?
I am, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Chapel. Yes, we can.
Very good. Thank you so much. It's an opportunity that I appreciate. This bill is extremely important, and it's something that I hope that you'll pass as a binding election, that there's no question that this is just advisory to the city council or any other elected body, but is actually something that the voters speak and the council responds accordingly. I speak as a former member of the State Board of Education, excuse me, because this is a pattern and practice we see all over our state, where a few contractors and architects will get together, they'll decide, okay, looks like we need a new project. And sure enough, they come up with a bond issue and say, all right, let's take it out for a vote. Now, many times those are special elections held at a very unusual time, normally in like March, April, or somewhere in that time frame, not as a general election, but very few people turn out. And consequently, the architects and engineers get their project, the contractors get the bid on it, and they make tremendous amounts of money on each of the 100 projects. In Wichita alone, we've had $370 million that was voted to do school bonds. It's now up to $6 billion statewide. And many of those projects are funded for special interest groups. 50% of the bonds that have been sold in the state are actually for sports complexes and turf on football fields, weight rooms and gymnasiums, that sort of thing. So the booster clubs enjoy it, the contractors enjoy it, and the students actually in our state of Kansas, their learning ability is actually not increased at all. In fact, it's gone down. We have a situation in Wichita where these signatures were brought to the city council. These two buildings are very landmark. They're historic buildings, been registered on the historic registry. And yet the city council basically just ignored the petitions and said, well, that's okay, we're going to do our own thing anyway. Now that's happened downtown in Wichita and in other cities across the state repeatedly, where folks will come in and say, oh, we got a great new project. That project, by the way, that they want to redo in Wichita will be over $1 billion. As Celeste pointed out, the original Century 2 was $12 million. $12 million compared to $1 billion. You can see where this is headed. There's a tremendous amount of money that the taxpayers will have to spend to try to tear down those two buildings and redo something that was supposed to create a, quote, a big convention center with lots of new people coming to Wichita and so forth. Well, we've seen that movie before. We had Gander Mountain was a special giveaway, if you will, to some developers, and that building sat there for a while. It was occupied, and now it sits empty. We've had Water Walk, and that building and that complex did not draw anywhere close to the amount of additional buildings and construction. We have a new ballpark, $75 million. That ballpark sits empty because of COVID, but it's not clear that it's going to actually do anything for that downtown area. It's a long time before we'll see any of the benefit from that 75 million. And by the way, they sold that property away for $1 per acre, $1 per acre. Now, it's my concern that we have to have a binding general election in November. When this bill can come up, this election of any demolition of those two buildings would have a chance for the citizens of Wichita to cast their ballot. So this pattern and practice does not continue, that we allow the voters to decide rather than contractors and special interest groups to get in and convince 4 people on the city council to vote in their favor. It's time for the people to speak and for the dollars of the taxpayers to be spent wisely. I thank you for your time.
Hey, committee, is there any questions of any of the proponents? Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate the history lesson by Celeste. I'm kind of a history buff, and I appreciate that, and sounds like a lot of work. But at the same token, I'm also a pretty strong proponent of local home rule, and I guess I'm somewhat disappointed that the city council did not. In my opinion, we probably shouldn't even be hearing this because of the fact that the city council did not want to make the decision. And I'm concerned about the precedent. John, if you might answer that. Concerned about the precedent that we may establish on other issues, maybe such as a tornado or who knows what, are we going to have to bring? And I realize this is, excuse me, kind of special because we're dealing with 80,000 square feet and there's not a lot around, but I'm also a little hesitant. So you give me a little background on that, maybe help me out.
Let's go back to the City Council Policy number 38. They mention home rule in it. And I am of the opinion that what they're saying here is they don't believe they have the home rule power to do this. So, I mean, that's why we're here for this bill is special that deals with voting, sir.
Mr. Chair, if you can permit me one more question. If that's the case, then have you guys pursued legal? I mean, obviously, it appears to me, and I'm not real knowledgeable about that, I'll confess that, but have you pursued legal action? I mean, where sounds like to me they've ignored the petitions. And, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to be in a position to where, as a committee member up here and as a state representative, that we're having to step into every one of these situations where there may not be following the law. You see where I'm coming from?
Well, this bill is very narrowly defined. It applies to 2 buildings in the state of Kansas. There was another bill that was introduced in this committee, was it a couple weeks ago, that House Bill 2232. It deals with different, it's a totally different bill, but it deals with maybe some municipal petition reform that's needed. It's not, this is outside what we're discussing here today. We would welcome the opportunity to come back and discuss that in length, the need basically for that reform, but that's beyond the scope of what we're trying to do here today, sir.
In response to my question, has there been a legal action by any of your groups? I know you're volunteer, but yet, you know, they technically ignored. I mean, so is there?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Vice Chairman Black, so let me start over again. Carl Peterjohn for the record. We tried to go through the municipal initiative statute, and the city adopted this policy, but before they adopted the policy, they sued myself and Celeste Reset for circulating the petition. And we don't want to fight this in court. We want to fight this in the court of public opinion. And you all, as state officials, have the authority over the local units. And as a county commissioner, I'm very familiar with both constitutional home rule for municipalities, statutory home rule for counties, and the fact that the citizens' opportunity to get to your key point, Representative Blex, our ability to initiate an action, I think, is totally limited under Kansas law for noncompliance. And so the city did act, and we are defendants, but our intent here is to try and work with the city and cooperate and help them implement their own policy, number 38, that they adopted last year.
Thank you for that. They normally don't have a problem increasing my taxes with a vote, so thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I guess my question's either for John Todd or Carl Peterjohn. I'm just wondering, why did you write this so narrowly so that it only applies to structures over 80,000 square feet? I guess that there's only 2 buildings in the state, as you've indicated in your testimony, that would qualify for that. I mean, aren't there other historic structures in the state that would be worthy of consideration to be saved that don't meet that threshold of 80,000? So I'm just wondering why you brought this forward so it was so narrowly defined it only affects one city.
If you don't mind, I'm going to address that just real briefly. I did push the button, so I should be on. Get closer. All right, sorry. The reason why we defined it so narrowly is because we didn't want this to be a burden on the League of Municipalities. We were trying to limit it to just 2 key structures. And keep in mind, they have to be on the National Registry. I wrote the paperwork for Century 2. And the library is also on the National Registry. Robert McLaughlin with Casey Modernist wrote the paperwork for that. So we're trying to restrict the buildings it would apply to prevent this from being too burdensome for other cities.
Thank you for that answer. I appreciate that. But that's, again, when we try to write laws that pertain to just one city, then that does open up that question as far as home rule and local control. So, and we had a beautiful courthouse that just got torn down in Wyandotte County. And it was owned by the city and it was on the historic register. So a bill like this could have saved that structure. So anyway, thank you for your response.
Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of lines of inquiry, if I might. So I must profess total ignorance to what the National Registry of Historic Buildings does. How come it doesn't protect you?
If you don't mind, I'd love to answer that question. There is nothing that prevents a building from being destroyed. So if the voters did vote to destroy Century 2, it would be destroyed. National Registry doesn't protect a building, but what it does do is it does make it a little bit more difficult to be destroyed if federal money is being used. There's a petition process, and also when it's on the National Registry, like the courthouse in Wyandotte, you can apply for tax credits to help fund renovating the building. So Century 2 and the library now are eligible by the city of Wichita for funding to help renovate both buildings.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might, another line of inquiry. Tell me a little bit more about the concert hall and the Mary Jane Teal Theater. What kind of seating capacities do those venues have? And what else do you have in Wichita of similar sized venues? Do you have very many, or are those unique, or tell me about the seating capacities?
That's an excellent question. We have a larger arena, Intrust Arena, which seats 20,000. This is a different venue, which is more intimate, and in Concert Hall, the continental seating, which is unobstructed seating, so you have a perfect view, seats 2,500. Mary Jane Teal, which is a more intimate theater, it was the Purple Theater, seats 650. Exhibition Hall and Convention Hall can be opened up to seat up to 5,000 people. So it's very flexible, but that's the range, 650 to 5,000. We have other smaller venues. We have the Orpheum Theater, which does seating as well. So there are other venues, but this is a state-of-the-art cultural center, if I can make that distinction. And it caps at 5,000 in various areas of the building. Did I answer your question?
Yes, I mean, other than, are there other examples besides the Orpheum? I'm trying to determine how unique this opportunity is with your seating capacities.
It's pretty unique. It's where the Wichita Symphony Orchestra performs. It's where Music Theater of Wichita performs, and there's actually an area, this is very unique. We can bring brand new Disney shows to Wichita because you can build sets. In Century 2, there's a set area where you can construct and paint and build sets. That's extremely unique, that we have a place in Wichita where you can construct and build sets for theater productions. So we actually get Disney shows because we have that capability. It's a very unique venue. Though we do have Crown Uptown, we have the Coliseum, we have the Orpheum Theater. There are other venues, but you could not put on a full-fledged music theater production like you can in Century 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks everybody for being here today. My question is, can you tell me very specifically why your petition with 17,000 signatures was denied? What reason was giving you specifically why it was denied?
Yes, there were several criteria that the city had. One, that we used the wrong form, although we had gone through the county counselor's office and they had approved it for form, and that was sustained by the court. They also said that the petition was too broad, and unfortunately, under municipal home rule appellate decisions, they have created a criteria that a petition that is administrative in nature is illegal. A legislative petition is legal, but legislative is defined very narrowly. Administrative is defined very broadly. And they said our petition was too narrow, but they also said our petition was too broad. And they also said because we didn't have a financial note, a tax or bond provision in our petition, it was invalidated on those grounds. And obviously, despite the fact that the city has regularly held votes, most recently that I can think of Well, one that sticks in my mind was fluoridation that had no fiscal or bond implications, but there was a municipal initiative voted upon in Wichita in 2011. But those are the four criteria, Representative.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to touch
Oh,
on that
and,
too.
and let me add one thing. As a former county commissioner, I think our maximum capacity at the Interest Bank Arena for basketball games around 15,000. It's a little bit less than that, but it's a little smaller than the number Celeste had. But I was more involved. I was a commissioner when that building was dedicated in 2010, so I know a little bit more about it. Thank you.
In July of 2019, the Riverfront Legacy Master Plan Group, their more than $1 billion concept for what they believe Century 2 should be was predetermined, in our opinion, basically. And they came up with a scheme, basically, the technique they used, we call it the Delphi techniques, predetermined outcomes. It involved the demolition of Century 2 and the former public library. And the thing that was probably most egregious to the citizens of Wichita was the fact that there was no public vote, yes or no. That's why, in my view, passage of this bill is very important to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Helmer.
Yes, I want to make a statement. I'll try to make it short. I live in Mulvane, south of Wichita. Riverfest is traditional. It's been around forever. Riverfest is centered around Century 2. It's a 6-day festival. And I've gone to Riverfest forever, and all the activities are there. I took my mother to flower shows there. My daughter graduated from there. All of my siblings, families, flower shows, car shows, everything you can imagine is at Century 2. And somebody asked what you had there. Everything that you can imagine was at Century 2. If you wanted to go to something, it was at Century 2. Like she said, that my mother loved to go to hear you play. It was just traditional. There was always some type of entertainment going on. So Century 2 was just part of Wichita. And it's just a traditional part of it. And it's a beautiful thing to see. There's sculptures around the outside of Century 2. It's built on the river. There's so much tradition there. People go down there. There's all kinds of waterfalls around there. It's just absolutely stunning. I can't say enough for it about the tradition that goes with it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Lee Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm a little bit torn on this, but what I wanted to be able to say to you is that I appreciate so much your local control, the feeling of local control, and I love exactly what I used that exact phrase actually when we were sitting in the gallery, that we cannot prevent citizens from having a redress of grievances to their government, even in a pandemic. And so I just wanted to applaud you for the effort, the citizen effort that you have made. It should be a local control issue. I struggle with the fact that these city councilmen have maybe gone rogue on you. I think that's a plug for why we need to make sure we are having strong local elections and running the right people in those elections. I think about, for instance, some of these larger facilities that may not even be contiguous. There may not be 80,000 square feet, but just, I think of the stockyards, for instance, in Kansas City, or, the state fairgrounds, or just some of these big entities. I'm a little nervous about setting a precedent to always to give the control away from the elected officials so I'm torn on this, but I just wanted to say I appreciate your efforts, because you did the right thing. You're doing the right thing. So thank you for your testimony here today.
Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Peter John, and I'll use your official title from days past. One of the things that I'm assuming a little bit we're going to share in coming from local government like myself and like you, the one thing that we hated was this body coming down and telling us what to do on a regular basis. If I'm not right, I apologize, but I think that we do share probably that feeling from time to time. My question is, has your organization obviously exhausted every avenue on the local front? And that's obviously why we're here today, correct?
At this point, I think it's an imperative because obviously with the pandemic challenges, and by the way, just for the record, I think we could have probably gotten 30,000 signatures total if we hadn't had to shut down the petition drive when we did. Of course, we were trying to meet a goal, so, but to go to your original point, I'm very familiar with KSA 19-101A, which is the local government restrictions on counties for exercising statutory home rule. So I am familiar with that, but you all have a bigger obligation. When I became a county commissioner, I took an oath to preserve and protect and defend the constitutions of the United States and the state of Kansas. And the provision that says all political power is inherent in the people should mean something. In my opinion, this bill brings that provision to life. And we can talk about whether it should be broader. I have no problem if you want to expand it to a smaller number than 80,000 square feet. I hope you wouldn't increase it because we want to include the library. But actually, if you increased it to probably 200,000 square feet, it would probably still cover Century 2. It wouldn't cover the library. But my point to get to your question is the bigger point that we need a government at all levels that preserves and protects and defends these basic constitutional principles that we've all taken an oath to preserve and protect as elected officials. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here today, even though I thank you for giving my old title. It's kind of gotten rusty since 2017.
Some of them we do. We lose them somewhere along the line. But yeah, I guess when I look back again, and I apologize because I don't know Sedgwick County's local ordinances or Wichita's local ordinances, but do you not have local historic districts or any of that?
I'm sorry, local what?
You guys don't have local historic districts or any of the local ordinances that would help with those?
I'm going to defer to Celeste and let her talk about that.
We do have a Wichita Historic Board, which was the first process this had to go through to be recognized as a historic building, but they merely make the recommendation. And then it went from the Wichita Historic Preservation Board to the State Historic Preservation Board here in Topeka, and then on to the National Historic Registry. So we had to start with the local preservation board and get approval before this could even go on.
But local ordinances that you have, districts or whatever you have, don't offer protections for local buildings.
No, in fact, Mead's Corner, which was the oldest two-story building in downtown Wichita, was destroyed against the recommendation of that Historic Preservation Board. Mead's Corner.
Welcome to your state house.
Thank you.
Committee, any further questions? Representative Lee Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more question. You said you were sued because you brought a petition? Is that, why were you sued for bringing a petition?
Basically, this is fairly common, unfortunately, in Kansas, and there's a lot of appellate cases, which is why, as Mr. Todd pointed out, there's another bill that you all were kind enough to introduce as a committee bill, House Bill 2232, that we work to try and address the fact that there's a lot of appellate law where citizens have petitioned and the local governments have said, we want to reject this petition because we think it's too narrow, or as they define it, administrative. And the courts have ruled that legislative is very narrowly defined, and there's a whole bunch of case law. In fact, this is the third time I've been sued by the city of Wichita for circulating what I call an illegal municipal initiative petition.
But it's the first time for me.
That's crazy. All right, thank you.
Okay, committee, any further questions? Before we move on to the other conferees, I've received a lot of emails in recent days in regards to some physical possible limitations on the building as the building has gotten older. Is the building used today the same as it was 5 years ago, 10, 20 years ago?
Yes, I'll answer that question. Music Theater of Wichita is planning to do limited performances because of COVID, but yes, they'll be in there building sets and performing. Wichita Symphony Orchestra also will be back in there performing. They're having a home show that will be in convention and exhibition, so yeah, just like it's always been. The one limitation we've heard about is soundproofing, which you can do. In fact, Bill Warren, who's on our committee and one of our supporters, has offered, and I've set this up with City Manager Layton, to go inside Century 2 and put a ballpark estimate on soundproofing the building and doing any type of renovation that might need to be done because of deferred maintenance. We think it's going to be 40 to 50 million, but again, we want to get our expert in there with Bill Warren and his engineers. And then we could apply for historic tax credits to offset that cost. But it's still being used today for exactly what it was designed for, in answer to your question, Chairman Thompson.
Second question then, something that was brought to light, I have no idea if this is factual or not, but I'd like to know. Does it have a 6-story basement structure underneath the building?
No, it doesn't. It's not 6-story, but it does. There's an entrance ramp to the back that goes down. It's really unique. And there's a freight elevator that they can then offload 44-foot trucks. It is limited to 44 foot. They can upload them to the stage from the freight. But I don't believe, to my knowledge, that first circular design I showed you was service level. It's only one level. I don't know that it would be 6, no.
Does it flood?
Yes, it does occasionally flood. It's right by the river. So keep in mind, it's interesting how Wichita developers want to develop along the river and go into the ground level because you're right along the water table. So there is occasional flooding, yes.
All right, committee, any further questions? If not, thank you for your testimony, and we will move along. Committee, I had no neutral testimony, but we do have, and by the way, before we get off topic, there is quite a bit of other proponent testimony that Gary has emailed you. He's kind of aggregated it, if it makes sense. So you guys can read through that at your convenience. We will now start with the opponents, and the first opponent we have is Scott Schneider with Associated General Contractors. Scott, welcome to Local Government Committee.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Scott Schneider, here representing the Associated General Contractors of Kansas. We do oppose this bill because we believe that the proper place for this to be worked out is at the local level. I do want to answer a question that Representative Blex had. I have a dear friend, Jack Glaves. He's up in age right now, but he tells stories about when he was a House member back in the 50s. Local Government Committee was the hardest working committee in the State House because, quite simply, we didn't have a constitutional home rule for local governments. That home rule, that amendment, was the solution because anytime a person had a problem, they would be up here asking for the state to solve it. Well, as an industry, we think a project only works if there's some agreement on it back home. And this project, we don't think has reached, exhausted its full remedy. And you have my testimony. I would caution you also by putting this in the statute, which I believe it should go in. Now, Mike and others and committee, if it were to make to the floor, would have to determine, is this germane to the municipal building statute, which I think it would be, well, it opens the door to every other tool that a local government uses, including abandoned property, star bonds. I put a list in there for you in my testimony. So by doing this, it does open the door to so many other things. I'm not going to comment on the project, the merits of it, but I am going to comment on the process. We don't think this is the appropriate venue to solve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, we'll hold questions to the end of opponent testimony. The next opponent we have listed is Amanda Stanley. Amanda is General Counsel with the League of Kansas Municipalities. Amanda, welcome to committee.
Thank you so much, Chairman Thompson, for allowing me to come today. I'm going to talk a little bit about overarching public policy. I'm also going to answer a couple questions that have been raised. Fundamentally, I do think this is bad public policy for the state of Kansas. This takes what should be a local government decision from local elected officials away from them and says, hey, we don't trust that our fellow citizens, elected people that will make the decision we want, so we're coming to the legislature and asking you to override it. It is the antithesis of home rule, like Scott just talked about. Before home rule was passed into the Constitution, I train on this all over the state, and I talk about, oh, well, we used to have statutes that targeted specific cities because we could. We could punish a city for doing certain decisions. We could override their decisions. And the whole purpose of the home rule negotiation was supposed to be that cities are treated the same, and that when you have a local decision that is contentious, you don't come to the legislature and say, hey, I'm going to ask all these people elected by people that aren't in my local community, hearing the debates on a daily basis, give them one perspective, and ask them to override and make the decision super difficult. That's what this bill does. It specifically targets one city in Kansas. They've told you it targets one city in Kansas. And if you believe in home rule as a public policy and as precedent, we shouldn't endorse that mindset. Additionally, as written, there's problems with the bill. A tornado could run through the middle of Century 2, and they wouldn't be able to do anything about it until they had a public vote. I'm not sure that's ever good public policy. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, the reason we have restrictions on initiative and referendum petitions, you're not suing the person that brought the petition. What you're doing is you're suing that the petition was invalid and was not a valid exercise of the statute. So when petitions are brought on administrative decisions, and the purpose of that is that administrative decisions are complicated and involve professional staff, engineers, high level of concentration and fact analysis. So those administrative decisions are not appropriate decisions for initiative and referendum, where local governments are prohibited from even going out and advocating on why a decision should be good on the ballot box. You can't spend public funds to do that. So initiative and referendum petitions in our statutes are very limited to not include those administrative decisions. They're supposed to be overarching legislative policy decisions. So when an initiative and referendum petition is brought on something like this, which is a very administrative function, a city does sue to invalidate the petition, saying that it is not a valid exercise of public law. You're not suing the individual saying that the individual did something wrong. You're saying the petition is not a valid exercise of public law. There has to be a way to go to court and argue if a petition is invalid. I mean, it wouldn't make sense for there to not be a process for that. So in this case, a petition was circulated. It wasn't a valid exercise of law. The city has agreed, and my understanding is, I'll let them talk about it, to have a non-binding election, which under home rule power, you are perfectly allowed to have non-binding elections. On a personal aside, I'm a Wichita kid at heart. I have been hearing about this debate for a decade, and there are equally contentious decisions and opinions on both sides, if you believe my Facebook feed at least. So people truly believe strongly that it should either be torn down or it should not, but it is not an overwhelming decision, it seems like, based off the comment section that I keep reading, because I can't help myself from reading the comment section, apparently. And so these kind of contentious public debates are most appropriate decisions for your local elected officials, who have to weigh what all of their constituents want, and they are in the best place to do that. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Again, I think we'll hold questions until all of the opponents have testified, committee, if that's okay. The next opponent testimony is Jason Watkins with the Wichita Chamber of Commerce. Jason, welcome to the Local Government Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Jason Watkins, appearing today for the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. And I'll try to be fairly brief. I know we've got some city council members that are on WebEx that want to testify as well. I also want to maybe correct the record just a little bit. The proponent testimony, which I enjoyed. I moved to Wichita, I think, when second grade, and I love Century 2. I think it's a cool building. So I enjoyed the presentation. I learned stuff about the building today that I didn't know. However, throughout the proponent testimony, it almost sounded like we didn't have a city council, or that if we did have a city council, we have the one city council in the state that doesn't actually ever have to stand for election. They do stand for election. They stand for election every 4 years. In fact, Mr. Chappell, referenced the Wichita baseball stadium, which, by the way, is gorgeous. If you get a chance to come to Wichita, come visit our brand new ballpark. It is a beautiful ballpark. There was some land that was sold as part of a development deal for $1 an acre. That upset a lot of people. Shortly after that, we had an election. Our mayor lost. Your former colleague up here, Brandon Whipple, is now mayor of Wichita. And there are a lot of folks back home that will tell you that that deal with that ballpark might have been part of the reason that he lost. There was another development deal. Made a lot of news. People got upset about it. There was an election. The mayor lost. Okay? So we have a city council. They stand for election every 4 years. They're accountable to the voters, just like every single one of your city council members are. I think the other thing that needs to be pointed out, it sounds like a decision has already been made. Like maybe we're tearing down Century 2 next week. There's been no decision made on that. What has happened is hundreds upon hundreds of hours spent with members of the community, different interest groups, different business groups, being brought together to say, what should the plan for Wichita be going forward? Century 2, beautiful building. Close to it is that library. We built a brand new library on the river. That library was not an attractive library for the citizens anymore. So what do you do with this space? It's prime real estate. It's right on the river. It's right in the middle of downtown. Our convention folks will tell you that we're losing convention business because of the design of Century 2, that it's not functional for today. But that's a conversation that the tourism folks have been having with the citizens and with the business community for some time. What should we do going forward? What are we willing as a community to spend, and what is our vision? That's what's been going on. Nobody has made a decision, no city council, no county commission has said we're tearing down the library, we're tearing down Century 2. There was a conversation and vote on the city council, I think within the last couple of weeks, about sending out bids for privatizing Century 2. That doesn't involve tearing down Century 2. So I want to reiterate, no decision has been made. The community conversations continue and they persist to this day. There's 7 members on the Wichita City Council. If the overwhelming will of the community is that Century 2 is not to be torn down, I don't think you're going to get 4 votes on the Wichita City Council to tear it down. It's not going to happen. I don't want to reiterate points that have already been made, but this is a local matter that ought to be decided at the local level. That's how our system of government works. I served in this body at one time. I remember the frustrations I had when folks out of Washington, D.C. told this legislature what they were going to do and how they were going to conduct their business. And I know none of you like that any more than I did back then. This is the same thing. If we don't like the feds telling the Kansas legislature how to operate, then we shouldn't like the Kansas legislature telling cities how to operate, especially about something that is so laser focused as to 2 buildings. 2 buildings. The proponents were honest. This doesn't apply to any other city or any other buildings in the state of Kansas. It applies only to the city of Wichita and 2 buildings. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time. We would ask that the committee reject this legislation and allow our community to continue to move forward with the conversation about what our riverfront should look like, what our tourism business should look like, and how we're going to handle conventions and entertainment moving forward as a community, the city of Wichita. I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Committee, our next opponent testimony is from Brandon Johnson, Brian Fry, and Becky Tuttle, I believe via WebEx. Is that correct, Gary? Are you folks there?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Brandon Johnson, Vice
You have
Mayor.
the floor. We can't hear you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to reiterate a few points. I won't harp on everything that has been said, but the city of Wichita does oppose this legislation. We are currently still in the middle of engaging our community about this actual effort with the riverfront. I know that there's focus on the 2 buildings, but what the city of Wichita and many of the businesses here in the city of Wichita were focused on was allowing folks to imagine the riverfront, not just the 2 buildings that are on the riverfront, but reimagine what that regional impact could be, engage our citizens and see what they wanted. You've heard numbers thrown at you this morning of 17,000. I'd also like to highlight that 14,000 Wichitans talked about the riverfront and highlighted their priorities for the city. And it would have been more, but that was a process that the private sector wanted to keep tight knit. They went out and engaged various areas of our city, various neighborhoods, various businesses, and came up with the priorities that we've seen, and the riverfront was one of those priorities. In that, we're still through the engagement process. The Wichita City Council has not even received the official Riverfront Plan right now. It's just a part of what's been out there. You can go to riverfrontlegacywichita.org right now and see it all. The studies of Century 2 over the years, the studies of the riverfront, the proposed ideas, that's still not come to council. The council hasn't said yes or no to even receiving that master plan. And the discussion that was brought by the proponents earlier that highlighted all of that, the petition and why the city really went against that was because, again, that was just broad in nature. It would have involved 200 different properties in the city of Wichita, while we were only talking about today 2 facilities. And it's important because we want to continue to engage our community and let them vote. We've always committed to a public vote. The council passed a policy. I think it was even told earlier that that actually is happening right now. So really, state level legislation isn't necessary to do what we're already committed to doing, and that's going out. There has been some concern about binding and non-binding, but that was because the proposal for Century 2 really was just a yes or no. What we were looking at for a potential plan on the riverfront would have involved potential tax increases or things like that. That would make it binding, and that the citizens could say yes or no to that. If they don't want to see a new riverfront with Century 2 being there or not, they'll vote no. If they do, they'll vote yes. But we've committed to a public vote around this. We're going to continue to engage the community about future plans. And now, and we're in this pandemic, or hopefully soon post-pandemic world, we've got to reevaluate what that plan looks like. And we've been talking to the folks that came up with that, about to say, hey, look, we got to look at that plan a little bit differently, work out something else to propose to the citizens of Wichita, but again, continue to engage. So with that in mind, just like to say that we're not even done engaging our citizens around this. And that's why we oppose this. We're already doing this work. We're going to continue to engage. We're going to get more input. And part of the opposition we had to the petition, it wasn't ignoring 17,000 voters. It was saying that the way it was worded really wasn't communicated to everyone. So I'll use one last example before I pass the torch over to my colleagues. When we look at the way the petition was worded, we could have looked at a historical building like at McAdams Park. I could argue day and night why that's a historical facility. I could argue why that swimming pool is historical in nature. And this petition would have forced the citizens of Wichita to vote on something that only would have impacted District 1. We can look at parks in District 3. When we look at Clap Park right now, you can argue the merits of that being historic. That petition would have forced all of Wichita to vote on that when the council member who's elected can work with his colleagues, his or her colleagues, to say, hey, this is something we should do. We plug it into the CIP and we go through our normal engagement. That's open houses, that's district advisory board, that's breakfast, that's internet. that's going door to door. We do all of those things about our issues, and I believe that the city council has the ability to work with our community to make those decisions going forward. And I'll stand for questions at the end.
For your testimony, do you have other folks with you? Or do we have
Yes.
Brian Pry?
Yes. Good morning.
Brian, welcome to committee.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And I don't know that I can add too much more to my colleague's statements. He was spot on with his testimony. I will again stress, though, that when the council took this issue up in the summer, back in August, after the petition was presented to us, you know, we definitely heard from our constituents and know that they do want to have a say and hearing their voice on this issue going forward. And we agreed unanimously that our citizens should be able to express their opinion through an advisory vote. And that's why we passed City Council Policy 38 to allow that to happen. Again, we completely agree with the home rule argument that has been said repeatedly this morning. Again, having a local issue under local control, that is why we are elected to do this. We have certain training and access to information that allows us to make those decisions. But again, we understand the thought process that those petition signers did, and we totally agree with it. That's why we did City Council Policy 38. And we believe the ongoing discussion and dialogue that we have with our citizens will allow us to make a determination as to the future of those two buildings. And that's where it should be made, locally. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughts. Do we have Becky Tuttle available also?
Don't believe so.
She's not. So is that all of the testimony then from that group? Okay. Thank you again. Okay, committee, at this time, we will ask questions, or you can ask questions if you would like, of the opponent testimony. Anyone ready? Representative Hahn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Watkins. So you're the mayor, is that correct? No, what are you? Sorry, what is your title? I saw your blue badge, and at first I was like, I thought you were the mayor. What is your title?
I'm with a firm called Watkins Public Strategies.
Okay.
And the Wichita Chamber is one of my clients.
Or one of your clients. So tell me, do you know why the city or the city council would have brought a lawsuit against citizens trying to attempt to get a petition? Do you know the answer? Or maybe that was somebody else on WebEx?
Yeah, I think, Representative, that both Councilman Johnson and Ms. Stanley with the league, and she's an attorney, might be better that she cover that again than me.
In Kansas law, we have very limited initiative and referendum petition statutes. In fact, you don't have it at the state level for lots of public policy reasons, I'm sure. At the local level, if a citizen wants to bring a certain action and create an ordinance, they have a limited ability to bring a petition. You have to have an ordinance attached to require a city to make binding law on what area you want. Our initiative and referendum petition statute is very limited. It has to be on a legislative issue, not an administrative issue. And there's public policy reasons for that, exactly like what I've said. Some things are not appropriate for just public opinion, and they should be specifically directed with the experts. Legislative action can be created through the initiative and referendum petition. So cities all across our state will get random petitions that do not meet the requirements for our initiative and referendum petition. For example, if you bring a petition on administrative action, like tearing down a building, that would not meet our initiative and referendum statutes. There has to be a way to point out that a petition is not a valid petition, because it would not make sense to just put every petition to a ballot, even if it doesn't make the requirements of statute. So if an invalid petition, a city believes it is not covered under the statute, is petitioned, what you do is that you file an action with the court saying that this petition is invalid. You aren't suing an individual for damages. What you're doing is saying this petition is invalid and we are not going to put it to a binding election. So while you might feel like you're getting sued, what what the lawsuit is about is whether or not the petition meets the requirements of Kansas law established by this body to go to an election. Because otherwise we would just put everything on an election and then people would get very confused on what's allowed or not allowed.
Thank you so much for the answer to that. It just seems to me, and I apologize, I didn't, you look a little mayorish, you look a little mayoral. Sorry, I should have looked at your testimony. You were so passionate, I just assumed you were from Wichita. It just seems to me that anytime citizens try to hold their government body accountable to something, because obviously they're desperate, you can feel their desperation, and your government sues you on, well, because this scope is too narrow or whatever, I struggle with that. That's a little bit of a red flag. Like, I think that we should have some transparency, I guess, in this process. So Amanda, I appreciate you explaining the scope of that lawsuit, and I appreciate your testimony today, all of you.
And Mr. Chairman, if I can just add one small point. I completely understand what your argument is. I think there's just a balancing act. You look at other states, for example, where initiative and referendums have everything, legalize marijuana, legalize Medicaid expansion, everything could be allowed on initiative and referendum. In Kansas, we've made a public policy choice that we don't think everything should go to the ballot for public opinion, that we want ordered government at the state level and the local level down. So that comes with a trade-off. Like, there has to be a way to strike valid petitions, and those get litigated. For example, there was a petition to make marijuana legal in Wichita that went all the way up to the Court of Appeals because, again, it was an invalid petition. So you have to think beyond just this perspective, and what else would you like to be on ballots if there's no way to challenge them?
Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for the two city council members. So you say that you've committed to have a vote, but if I'm understanding correctly, it would be a non-binding vote. Number one, do you have the authority to authorize a binding vote? And number two, what's the purpose of a non-binding vote if you could have that vote and then go ahead and countermand the will of the people through because it was a non-binding vote?
So thank you for the question. Definitely my colleague fill in where I might leave out. The non-binding piece was mainly due to the focus on those two buildings, and there was no actual financial package attached to that. So it was really letting us know that they were seeking a yes or no on the facility. When you look at the Riverfront Plan, which did cause some pause, I think, for folks who just want to save it because it would have eliminated both the Century 2 building and the library, there was actually finances attached to that. There was a phased plan that would have built that. Some of that would have been private sector investment, but some of it would have been public sector investment as well. So with that plan, there would have been a binding vote that people would have agreed, yes, we want to do this plan. These are the phases we're agreeing to, and this is how much it costs. We've not had that same opportunity with the Save Century 2 group. It's just been, we want to save those facilities. So the compromise per se was, okay, well, if we do that, then we'll go out and say, do you want to save Century 2, yes or no? We'll get a majority vote either way, and that would advise us. And I think any elected official worth their salt, if the folks say they want to keep it and it's an actual vote, even if it's advisory, you're not going to go against the will of the people. We just haven't had that opportunity yet, and there was no financial mechanism attached to what was being proposed on their side.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a quick question for Mr. Watkins. So, Jason, thank you for being here. And I know there's a lot of passion around saving these two structures. And so I get from the testimony that for the most part, you guys feel like this is a decision that's best made locally, that's where the investment is, that's where most interest is. So you feel that this is probably a decision that's made best by the local citizens in Wichita and the local elected officials.
Yes, Representative, that's exactly where we are. And I try to never read my testimony, but I believe in my testimony, there's even a section in there that speaks to the fact that we're not saying that the citizens of Wichita shouldn't have their voices heard. To the contrary, we think their voices should be heard. And in fact, we think their voices have been being heard. And we think that process should continue. But again, we think it's a local matter. I was talking to one of the representatives on the committee, and I said, you know, this is kind of a family food fight. It's a local matter at a local level, and that's where it should be decided. And we are concerned about the precedent that it sets, getting the legislature involved in an issue like that.
So generally, do you think that you support local control in general then? Would you say that, at least in this committee?
Certainly in this committee, Representative, certainly in this committee.
Mr. Watkins, if I could, and mainly because your testimony lends itself to a great deal of explanation, but from your testimony, I feel very confident that the Wichita City Council has done a phenomenal job with their due diligence on this matter. There doesn't seem to be any warning flags that I can see that they're going to move quickly. I guess most of us on this committee have local government experience. And there has to be, in my mind, a really high bar of almost dereliction of duty or neglect at the local level to come to this body, especially this committee, and ask us to intervene. So from your experience, is there anything that would give you any pause or have that rise to the level that we should be considering this?
Appreciate the question, and absolutely none, Mr. Chairman. The Chamber doesn't always agree with every decision made by the City of Wichita, but I don't think we would ever offer criticism saying that they're not engaged with the community. They are engaged. There are a lot of opportunities for citizens to engage at the council level, to engage with individual council members. We have district advisory boards, and I don't know how many people are on these, but there are 20, 23 member district advisory boards. Major decisions go to those district advisory boards in each of the 6 districts, and I believe the mayor has one as well, before it even gets to council level. So there is a tremendous amount of opportunity for engagement. And while folks may disagree, I think it would be wholly unfair to say that folks that are supportive of Century 2 have not been offered the opportunity to engage. And I'd finish my answer by saying, again, no decisions have been made. Tearing down Century 2 is not scheduled. There's not even a vote scheduled on the council related to tearing down Century 2. So the process is ongoing.
Thank you. Committee, anything further? Representative Featherstone.
I think I just have a statement to make. I've been coming to Century 2 since I was in college for Kansas Music Educators Association. So it's like a second home. My independent music group has considered moving our conference there, so we have the stability of Century 2. As a music mom, some of my kids' greatest music accomplishments occurred at that KMEA conference. So it really brings a lot of, emotions of what a great place this has been in our history. But my teacher flag goes up because I feel like I'm trapped in a custody dispute, which I have been involved in as a teacher, and that makes me just very cautious because my teacher response is always, I think you need to work this out outside of my studio. I don't think it's my place to be in this and to just to hands off. So although I love Century 2, I love what we've done there, I'm really concerned that we're stepping in somewhere, and I really don't want to be in custody disputes throughout the state over other very worthy buildings too.
Well said. Representative Lee Hahn?
Yes, I also had a statement to make. I know we've said this is a local issue, and it is. It is a local issue, but it also affects, I'm from Western Kansas, so when we come to town to shop and go to a concert and go to anything outside of Dollar General. We're coming to Wichita. And so Century 22 has serviced all of us on the western part of the state. It's not just, though it sits in Wichita and it's a gem of Wichita, it's been a blessing to the entire western part of the state for years. So thank you again for being here.
Okay, committee, anything further? I would like to thank the proponents. Obviously, your passion on your issue is admirable, and I think that your side of the issue needs to be heard, and I commend you for doing that. In fact, I thank you for doing that. So committee, anything further for the good of the committee? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you.